to say in order to enter the conversation, you have to master the conversation, and you have to, understand all of its moves, and that's where it stops. It's just about metabolizing it. But I think that really, I love working with graduate students because you all are, you're creating the new ideas. You're giving us life. Otherwise we are like the dead mannequins, walking around, and not that, of course we have new thoughts as well, but I do think that there's a certain vitality to really coming up with a project right away, and to have the bravery to say, I am going to not change the field, I have something new to add to this conversation. And the last thing I would say, sorry, I have a lot to say, I can stop talking, I see other hands, but the last thing I say, and I say this to my thesis writers as well, is that I think you have to write the project that only you can write. And that will mean something different to different people. But if you know what you're going to write in advance, it's probably not a good project. If you can see all of its moves, there has to be a question, a real question there, that you don't necessarily know the answer to, or even if you think you know the answer to, it's not 100% satisfying to you, but there's still that question that keeps coming back to you. And I think you have to be faithful to that, because ultimately you're the one that is doing the work, and you are the one living with yourself, and you want the project to be interesting to you, so much so that this work that you're starting on is going to be the thing that you carry forward into the world, and that you continue to work on, right? These projects, even though there's sometimes I look at my project and I never want to talk about the word welfare ever again. I'm done with it. But then I'm like, oh no, come back, I love you. But I do think that the more that you can tap into whatever deep veins you have in you, and it might be things that you bring to Yonsei before Yonsei, right? That is something that has stood me well. Yes. There's two, yeah.
I think she raised her hand first.
Oh, yes. It's hard to see computers. I see two eyes. So those eyes, yes.
Hi, my name is Tinsel Park, and I'm in the first semester of my master's program. I just wanted to ask you something about the domestic aspect of welfare, or like the reconstruction.
Yes.
So you mentioned like the English patient and the country house and romanticization. And I was wondering if the domestic aspect made reconstruction like alongside what the state was doing, and like how does the element of nostalgia play a role in reconstruction? Because I feel like reconstruction is going into the future, and nostalgia is kind of into the past.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so,
No, that's such a great question, and I think what you've tapped into. There's that slide, but there was also the slide where I had Evelyn Waugh's Brides Have Revisited and Orwell's 1984, right? And I think what you're speaking to is Evelyn Waugh's Brides Have Revisited, and the kind of the cult, what he called the cult of the country house, and his reintroduction. He's kind of ashamed of writing Brides Have Revisited because it really tapped into this moment of saying, all the great houses of England are being destroyed or can no longer be kept up, and what's going to happen in this brave new society. We have this nostalgia for this Britain that was. And I think in the materials on reconstruction, a lot of the debate was, what is this going to look like? Is it going to look like creating buildings built along like brutalism or the modernist architectural principles, or is it going to look like going back to and restoring in some way a sort of older re-Britain or something like that? And so in the word reconstruction, even just reconstruction, what are you building? And I think that that's where the Beveridge report is so interesting to me. And so in the materials, I think as well, that precipitate from it, it is about revolution. It is about, even though it ends up not being, right? It's not like they've created a socialist utopia afterwards. It's deeply conservative in many ways. At the same time, this was a moment where welfare, they weren't, it really lost its stigma in a way that was kind of radical in a way. Saying like, what could this new equitable Britain look like, where the houses we're imagining that could be built under the welfare state aren't just the poor house, right? But actually houses that people really want to live in. And I think that's a really, really important tinge of radical potentiality in what was still a relatively conservative, in the end, political transition. But yeah, and the domesticity, I think your question was about whether it was alongside the state or whether it was.
Yes, because I think you said it was like a domestic care removed from the state, so I was wondering like how the state and the domestic side kind of like came together, or like did they do separate things, or were they doing the same
I think they were really, and that's exactly, yeah, I think that what was so interesting to me in these materials is that it really was trying, it was stripping open people's homes and looking in. Let me pull up. This is the beginning of Muriel Sparks' The Girls of Slender Means, which is just brilliant. Long ago, in 1945, all the nice people in England were poor, allowing for exceptions. The streets of the cities were lined with buildings in bad repair or in no repair at all. Bomb sites piled with stony rubble, houses like giant teeth in which decay had been drilled out, leaving only the cavity, et cetera, et cetera. And it talks about this kind of stripped open domesticity, like a new art form, leading up and up to unspecified destination that made unusual demands on the mind's eye. And then so the stuff of everyday life was thought to be very much kind of in step with the new welfare state. If we only design the right living conditions, a more coherent kind of nation will emerge in some way, down to the brass fixtures. And so the Festival of Britain, 1951, which was a huge exhibition that was sort of signaled Britain's domestic revitalization. One of the most popular parts of that exhibition were these homes, like kind of rooms that people would walk in and see the kind of living design of these homes. It was very popular to the public. So yeah. The question?
Right. My question is not very organized, but listening to your presentation was really inspiring because I've been having questions about human rights or welfare and how, because I try to read literature from queer perspectives and I don't really know when and where of the literature, but I'm trying to do that. And I've been questioning a lot of like how our desires about living a better life is becoming highly more institutionalized, and our sense of justice is also relying on the institutions and the state. And I was, I don't know, it's just this, like, and trying to seek other imaginaries. Felt to me like a vacuum a lot of times, and I was thinking maybe I should just go back and read some materials like before, I don't know, the neoliberal or whatever, and then, I don't know, your presentation giving me a cue. I was wondering about what you said, I'm not sure if this was your exact word, but then you mentioned something about transnational resistance to welfare state, or you mentioned mutual domestic care. I think we were talking about Hollinghurst's novel.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, Hollinghurst is a great example for thinking about what a truly alternative form of welfare could be, one that is based on people and care, and tries to do away with a state that was arresting queer people and imprisoning them. And so there is a kind of like queer welfare utopia that I think he is suggesting there. I mean, so the project also, so it was as much about post-war and post-45 as it was, I was writing the project in a moment where people were really thinking about literature in the state. It was a special issue of contemporary literature in the state that said, okay, we have to think about ways of thinking about literature that isn't just, the embattled individual fighting the monolithic state, right? But what other narratives are there for thinking about states that fail, like failed states or moments of states that are in transition in some way. And I found that to be really inspiring, a really interesting conversation, and this was a moment too where I think people were thinking about the welfare state, which in some sense is a very obvious place to go if you want to think about what a state can do that is good in some way. But I also think law, and my interest in law, I've always been interested in what is the most we can hope from state institutions. I think it's really really your question. And I don't know, I mean, it's funny because I think in the hinge between the first and second project, my first project, I also wrote in the US when Obama was president and Obamacare rolled out and hooray, you know, health insurance, amazing. And then I got the contract and then I had to edit it during the Trump years, which was, I was like, oh my God, this is awful. But I think that the first book retained what I think that the state, even though maybe it doesn't deliver perfect justice really ever. We might think of like reparations for Japanese Americans who were interned, $20,000. Only successful reparation in the US. Amazing on the one hand, not enough on the other hand. Like when will repair ever be enough and when will it ever be timely is the question that my project is kind of suggesting. Repair has to keep being imagined because it's never ever fulfilled. There's something endemic to the term repair and reparation. And why I actually call it's not like states of reparation, states of repair, it's a process. So I think I lost my train of thought. Nevertheless, I think that the state is still a site that people do connect to and will always connect to. And I want to take that seriously before dismissing it, right? Not that I necessarily believe in it, but I also think, I don't know, I think we still need to imagine what welfare could look like. I still think that in times of war, we need to care about what rebuilding is going to look like and really put an emphasis on that. And that should be on the end date. You should only enter war if you have a commitment to cleaning up afterwards. So yeah, that's one answer to your question. Other questions? About the project, or it could just be about like the profession. I'm also happy to talk about that. Or about Ishiguro. Yes, yeah.
I'm Yuchina. I am a second year PhD student. I wonder like how you figured out like reconstruction in terms of like different kinds of social levels, like engaged in that process, because there's lots of different classes in society, and there would be like different levels of like social welfare based on that.
Absolutely.
And how did you like sort it out like with the text?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when people think about literature, or when people think about the welfare state, you think about like, especially in the British context, thinking about the British left, you would absolutely think about the working class as the proper subject or the historical subject of welfare. Again, I think what is very interesting about this moment is that it was a brief flash opening where welfare was meant to be for all, even though of course it wasn't, you know. But you know, there's an apocryphal story about how the Queen Mother herself would only take a bath in 3 inches of bath water during the war. Everybody was brought to a certain level because of the war. Everybody was subject to the same rations, although in practice, of course, that's not true. But still, the question of class is a really important one. And as we saw in the opening to Muriel Spark, long ago in 1945, All the Nice People Were Poor is really riffing on that, I think. And Elizabeth Bowen, and Sam Sullivan, I mean, in some ways, many of these writers, none of whom also are actually, only Alan Hollinghurst is English. They're all also very adjacent to Britain and Britain's projects. So Elizabeth Bowen is Anglo-Irish, Muriel Spark is Scottish, Sam Sullivan is Trinidadian, I believe. Alan Hollinghurst is very British, but very queer. Michael Adachi is Sri Lankan Canadian, and Katsuri Ishiguro is Anglo-Japanese, right? So I think that there's a way that it's both about class, but also about who are these author subject positions that are trying to expand what this can look like. Elizabeth Bowen, The Heat of the Day, is a really had to begin with thinking about the houses of the working class as the ones that really were the proper objects of reconstruction because there was a horror of their squalor. The fifth giant on the road to reconstruction was squalor. What needed to be constructed was the East End, and were these houses that in Elizabeth Bowen's The Heat of the Day, the protagonist takes a train and in the train ride she passes by a working class neighborhood, and she has this really vivid but really kind of very cold, very typical of the time kind of sociological imagination about the lives lived within a working class home and the poverty of it, the dirt, the limitations of it. And so I think that absolutely is an undercurrent of this project, but I didn't want to write that version of the book either, because I was much more excited about the more capacious, and again, like maybe less typical version of what this could look like. So yeah, Elizabeth Bowen's she distrusts the working class home as a site of, she calls it a sort of like soulless atmospheric homes. But she also has a distrust of the big house and who's going to inherit, one of her characters is going to inherit this Irish big house, and there's a sense that that's also a sterile kind of no future path as well. So she's stuck, and that's why I think it's so interesting about this novel, which is a torturous novel to read because it can't make up its mind. It's stuck between these two visions of sociality. It can't believe in the future moving forward, but it doesn't want to think about the past either. And so it just keeps exfoliating different genres to try and locate itself as a novel, but I think it fails. A lot of people like the novel. I admire it, but I don't like it. But great question. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your lecture. I had a question that's specific to Never Let Me Go.
Yeah.
And it's been a while since I've read it, so I apologize if I can't remember exactly. But so I thought your reading of Hailsham was really, really interesting, and I was wondering perhaps what you thought about the cottages then, because I remember the cottages being described as a kind of reconstruction of old farm buildings into what we might see as state housing, because that's where the clothes go to live while they wait. So they've received welfare and care from Hailsham, and then they go to this weird kind of middle transition phase where they're just milling around in the cottages, and then they go into the cruel world where they have to be exploited. So I was wondering how you read the cottages in relation to this idea of post-war welfare, and
I love that. Thank you. That is another. I don't write about that, but you're right. It's such a particular intermediary, weird kind of camp space in a way, where these like just graduated Hailshams, or it's a moment of mixing too. It's both the Hailsham students who realize they are exceptional in kind of this. I don't read it quite as the vast government homes, because I read the vast government homes as like the schools that the other clones came to, and then they mixed in this one moment. But I'd have to think more about that. It's also the moment where she starts thinking about sex, right? I think in interesting ways, and it's also the moment where they, in meeting other non-Hailsham students, they start to understand the mythology of Hailsham and this idea that, oh, if a clone couple proves their love, they can go to their makers and ask for a reprieve. So I think I would start, and I should have, this is a very good point, but I would have started with, why does the fantasy begin there? Why can't it begin in Hailsham itself? And it has to be when you mix with non-Hailsham students, I guess, to really fully understand. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very particular texture and affect that the cottages have. I also love that she's writing her thesis on Victorian literature. It's like, oh, okay, thanks, Ishiguro. You are such a great parasite of the British novel form. That was not a satisfying answer
mine is not related to your lecture.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you to share, what kind of challenges you had finding press for your monograph, and
Yeah.
and what helped you.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think that there's a question too, at least for the first book, as to whether to place it in a series or not, I think is a real question. I really wanted to, and there are different camps on this. And the first thing to say, and the first challenge, is that just like a dissertation or a thesis, you've never written a book before until you've done it. And even though people can tell you what it's like, nobody's experience is alike at all. It was shocking to me how different people's experience was. So, there are as many different stories as to how you got a contract as there are books in the world. So that's one answer. So like write in community, and don't isolate yourself, because it's a very already an isolating profession, in some ways an isolating experience. I knew I wanted to be in a series because I wanted my book to have company as a first-time author. I also wanted to, and now in retrospect, I think I wish I'd been brave enough to not want a series, because it meant another round of editing. But I wanted to have series editors who would read my book, who were in the field, that then could help me kind of hone, I think. So this came out of a mid-century studies series, and I admired the books that came before it, and I knew I happened to know one of the editors, and it was again a very organic, very much who you know, very much institutional prestige sort of thing, and he talks like, oh, why don't you send me an abstract for the book. I delivered a paper actually at an MSA, a Modern Studies Association, and he was organizing it. And from that, he said, "Oh, you got the job at Harvard. Oh, okay." So, but with or without Harvard, I think that the lesson for me there, and maybe a lesson that is, I generally think it's a good thing to go to conferences, even though they sometimes can be very interesting spaces. I think that it's really important to keep going to conferences and to continue to be an active part of the profession, because when you go to a conference, it's a really concentrated moment. You see what's happening in the field. So go to your field conferences, not just MLA. And there you never know who's going to have your panel, who's going to come to the panel, and so that can increase the chance of running into these people. So yeah, that's kind of how the book got to where it was, and ask friends about their experience. How was your experience with Columbia? How was your experience with Duke? And you have a sense. You start to get a sense too of look at what kind of books they're publishing. Where will Duke be? And it's kind of an obvious point, but you have to learn. Nobody tells you these things, also, right? That you should just go look at the publisher's website and see what they're publishing in. Who's the series editor? What do they seem to be acquiring? What are they interested in? So yeah, it's as much doing your research as it is kind of serendipity, in a way, I would say, and mostly hard work. Questions? Yeah.
I had a question on, or if you could talk about how you would distinguish or differentiate between these novels that you worked on that exist between nostalgia and dystopia, and dystopian novels, because if this fulfillment of reconstruction or reparation is ultimately impossible, then you do share kind of like this negative or suspicious view.
Aren't they all dystopian?
Yeah, aren't they also in a way dystopian?
Yeah. No, that's a great, what is this? I don't speak Korean, I'm just gonna exit. Okay, there we go. So, yes, good question. I think when I think of, it was a real path not taken, to think about, even if I go to the next slide. The thing is, not all of these are dystopian. I think you could read The Girls of Slender Means is slightly dystopian, but it's not really. Never Let Me Go is, and High Rise, I mean, and I use that as a dystopian contrast in the interlude, is obviously a very dystopian vision of a high density housing estate that's supposed to provide its inhabitants every need. And Bucci Machetta's is kind of a social realist, post-colonial text that is about what it's actually like to live in a housing estate, and contends with the reality of it and says it's not all bad, J.G. Ballard. So yeah, but I think the other question is that in some ways Reconstruction is utopian, right? It is thinking about large-scale social projects. It is thinking about re-worlding the world. It is thinking about systems. It's thinking about the good no place, right? That is utopia. So, but I think that there's something about the way that these authors invest in still, because they're novels, they invest in the individual as a site for potential connection and transformation. And they do so in a way, I'll take 1984 as probably the best known example. There, Winston Smith, has this relationship with Julia, and that could be a site of, beautiful repair. But even that is written under the name of like sex and romance and like a bit of sexual reproduction in some way, and not about kind of I think the more horizontal ties of social welfare. And I think that the texts that I'm looking at are not only pushing back against a kind of hard, cold sci-fi dystopian vision of the world, but they're also interested in what it means to be good neighbors, right? Neighborliness, living together, the discomfort of living together, but a discomfort that isn't extreme in the same way that a dystopian world would then say, we cannot live together, therefore everything is doomed. Power works like a boot stamping in your face forever, and that is all we have. So I think that even in their negative vision of the welfare state, there's still an attachment there. And that's why Never Let Me Go is such a paradigmatic text for thinking about that very fine edge that you're locating about. There's capital D dystopia, and then there's little d dystopia that I think Ishiguro inhabits so perfectly in that text. Thank you.
Shall we take a look at that?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you so much.
much.
Have fun, guys. I appreciate all your questions. Thank you. I'm happy to stick around a bit after.